It seems like we're pretty sparse today, so I'm gonna have Gwen send. Do you have a piece of paper on you? I'm gonna have her send around a paper for extra credit. But wait, you guys have to do me a favor. It takes me forever to enter the extra credit because they're not in alphabetical order. So I know, and it's just like so hard. So my challenge is, could you try to kind of write your name, and maybe Gwen will be nice enough to say, like, A, B, C, some side over there. She'll get us started, maybe, so that it doesn't have to be exactly in alphabetical, but like roughly, if your name's an A over here, if your name's a W over here, last names, yeah. Yeah, maybe 2 columns, Based on your last name. Yeah. Yeah. Huh? Was it just recently? Yeah, I've been in open lab for a little while, so I mean, not yet, I guess. Was it good? Yeah. Nice. FERPA would love that. FERPA. So as I saw these answers to the vitamin question roll in, I love the one about vitamins being the elixir of life, and then, oh no, that's actually coffee, right? And so I had this momentary thought of just abandoning the coverage for today and talking about the mechanism of action of coffee. Maybe at the end of the hour we'll do that. That sounds like a plan. So I promise you that our coverage today will focus on vitamins. It is interesting to know, a lot of your answers are really great, that these are things that we don't synthesize, or certain organisms have lost the ability to synthesize, and so we have to take them in our diet. It's actually interesting to note that historically the term came from vital amine, because the first vitamin that they recognized was an amine. That doesn't mean all are, it just happened to be, so that's where the term actually derives. So we're going to talk about them in the context that some of the latter answers came up with, cofactors, coenzymes, and their role in the world of enzymes, because that's where we obviously were last time. So promise that we will come back to that idea of vitamins. So in terms of the hypotheses, I've had a couple of those roll in this week. I've tried to respond to you and say, as soon as I can, I will get you more formal feedback on those, and I will. I have not, though, received hypotheses from all of the groups, so I look forward to seeing those come my way. And here's what I would like you to do. I would like these are the people that got texted, just really recently to say, she's giving extra credit today. Hurry, come to class. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, what? No, I know all the chemical engineers have to come late. I know. So in any case, please try to get those to me by the end of the week. I have had some concerned questions about the hypotheses. And one thing that I want you to know is that while I would like this first submission to be thoughtful, I would like it to show me that you have done some background reading. I would like it to show me that you've thought about the form that it's taken. But I also do recognize that this is an iterative process where I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, well, in this way, this is really good. And I can see you tried really hard on this. But how about, could we change this, right? I do not expect perfection on the first draft. I'm hoping that we will have a little bit of back and forth as we make it into a really nice, testable draft. So don't worry if there are little nuances that you think are imperfect when you send it off. That's what I'm hoping I can help you with, okay? That being said, I will look for at least some sort of email from your group on Sunday. Worst case scenario, the email I get from you on Sunday is, we can't do it. All hell's broken loose. And like, I don't know what's going on, Rachel. I just don't know what to say. Hypothesis pending, okay? And that's fine. But I would love to get something that looks a little bit smoother than that. But if nothing else, I'll be getting that on Sunday, I hope. Homework 4 due on Tuesday. Just remember to get that going. And then also a great job to many of you today doing some rubric assessments of your skills. That was really fun. I really enjoyed seeing how incredibly eloquent your technique has become in the lab. So it was nice for me to watch some of you doing your skills. When we left off, we were deep in the heart of enzymes, or I should say we were deep in the active site of enzymes. And it turns out that not all enzymes can function alone. Maybe kind of like we are, you need a good friend there to help you out. Some enzymes need cofactors. Cofactors are the non-protein components of an active site that an enzyme actually has to have in order to work. Now, not all enzymes need cofactors, but a lot of them do. And the world of cofactors is pretty diverse, but they're never protein. There's some non-protein component. So with basic terminology, let's write down the fact that enzymes that have a cofactor, when they don't have that cofactor, they're called an apoenzyme. Apoenzymes do not function. In fact, it's really funny to take an enzyme and rip out its cofactor from its active site and then do a kinetic assay and watch it baseline, right? I know, so sad to take away its little cofactor and then it can't do its job, right? It just simply cannot do its job. So an apoenzyme with its cofactor is finely whole. A holoenzyme is the enzyme that has its cofactor, and it feels that it can now do its job once it's got that essential component of the active site. When some of you texted in your answers to the vitamin question, at least one person texted that vitamins are cofactors. So some cofactors are, in fact, vitamins. That is a true answer. Let's look at the different categories of cofactors, and we can split them down into two types. The first type are essential ions. So ions, for example, zinc is often at the active site of an enzyme. So we see zinc metal maybe playing a role. They're having a party over here and they didn't invite us. Can you believe that kind of stuff? I mean, right, there's food and everything. So magnesium and zinc, these are two good examples of ions. Actually, when I was an undergraduate, the enzyme that I worked with a lot in the lab was one that had a zinc metal at the active site. Poor Alex, so sad. And what we were researching was, what if we could take that zinc metal out? And that's why we were watching, like, the activity would just baseline when we pulled the zinc metal out of the active site. And we were actually trying to replace it with a cobalt, which was really cool because cobalt is paramagnetic, zinc is diamagnetic, so the enzyme turned purple when we replaced a cobalt in there. And then we could study better its active site and the chemistry that was going on at its active site. So it's pretty neat to think about ions being there at the active site and helping the enzymes do their job and maybe helping them catalyze the reaction that they catalyze. So essential ions are one category, coenzymes are the second category, and here we go. These are often derived from vitamins. So these are two categories that make up the coenzymes. The first category is called the co-substrates. So co-substrates are, I like to make the analogy that they're a lot like pizza delivery guys. So who's had a possibly fruitful career in pizza delivery? Have you, Julia? Yeah, okay, so from here on out, Julia is our co-substrate, okay? And so I want you to think about it this way. What she does is she goes and picks up the pizza from the pizza parlor, right? And then she takes it to wherever she's delivering it, and she drops it off there. Probably the people that take the pizza from her want it a lot more than she really wants it, right? She hands it over, and she heads on back to the pizza parlor to pick up more pizza. This is a lot like a co-substrate. A co-substrate binds at the active site of an enzyme where it picks up its pizza, which often is electrons. So it picks up its electrons, right? And then it dissociates from the active site of the enzyme, and it goes to some other enzyme where it delivers its pizza or electrons, more often electrons than pizza, and it delivers those, and then it comes back to its original enzyme to pick up more electrons. Okay, so co-substrates, their beauty is that they can dissociate from the enzyme. So just in the same way that Julia could leave the pizza parlor, sometimes she was probably pretty glad she could leave the pizza parlor, and she could head out dissociating and going to deliver whatever it is that she was carrying, right? Pizza for Julia and electrons for most of these enzymes. Regains its original structure once it delivers those electrons and then goes back to its original enzyme. So this becomes a lap, right? It's basically doing laps where it's picking up electrons, delivering electrons, picking up electrons, delivering electrons. And that's the lifestyle of a co-substrate that happens to deliver electrons, right? There are some other things that co-substrates can also deliver. We're going to focus in often in this class on the ones that deliver electrons. Now, here are some famous ones. NAD plus and NADP plus are co-substrates. When NAD plus picks up electrons, it becomes NADH. When NADP plus picks up electrons, it becomes NADPH. It is in its reduced form, right? So it does lapse and it transforms itself between its NADPH form and its NADP plus form, depending on whether it's carrying the electrons or not carrying the electrons. Now here's the million-dollar question. What is this, from what vitamin is this derived? Now let me give you a hint. It's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. NAD stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. So what vitamin does that come from? Niacin. Good, Jim. So niacin is the vitamin that some organisms have to take in their diet in order to synthesize this particular co-substrate. So now we have another class of coenzymes. These are the prosthetic groups. Prosthetic groups, now who's waited tables at an in-house restaurant? Oh man, Julia, you're just all kinds of things, you know. We'll pick on Rachel. She raised her hand too. She can be our prosthetic group. Because the same thing is going on in the restaurant, right? Going into the kitchen, bringing the dishes out, going back in the kitchen, bringing the dishes out. But you're doing it all in the restaurant. This is what prosthetic groups are doing. They're picking up electrons, delivering electrons, picking up electrons, delivering electrons, but they never leave the enzyme, right? There's no getting out of the active site of the enzyme. So prosthetic groups remain bound to the active site of the enzyme throughout the entire reaction. By the end of the catalytic event, right, the event that the enzyme catalyzes, a prosthetic group must have gone back to its original form. A good example of this is flavin adenine dinucleotide, or the EPIC FAD. From which vitamin is that derived? Riboflavin. Yeah, we're going to talk about folic acid in a minute, Rex, but yeah, this is derived from riboflavin, so flavin adenine dinucleotide. Cool. So, are we comfortable then, if I were to ask you this question, is FAD a cofactor? Yes. Is zinc a prosthetic group? No. Okay. Is FAD a coenzyme? Yes. Okay. Is FAD a co-substrate? No. Okay. Are we cool with that? So that's how that categorization works, right? So looking at this particular snapshot, these are my absolute favorite vitamins, my Women's One Daily. I absolutely have a love affair with them because prior to this particular Women's One Daily, every vitamin I took made me puke, which, you know, that's just not a good scene. So I switched to these. These are food-based, and so I really do adore them. But notice that if we search down the list, Niacin is definitely on this list, as is riboflavin. So these are things that we have to take in our diet in order to make NAD and FAD. Now, some of you are thinking, God, it's Friday. All I can think about is beer. So I thought, let's go ahead and entertain that thought. Or maybe you're like me and it's a good red wine that's on your mind. If so, then this will be of interest to you. So there is an enzyme, and that enzyme is called alcohol dehydrogenase. Alcohol dehydrogenase is a super important enzyme in yeast. Yeast, when they are living in what kind of environment, produce alcohol? Anaerobic, right. So what we're going to do later this semester is we're going to be really a little mean to our yeast. We're going to put a culture of yeast in some must, which basically means we're going to get you some grape juice from the store and add a lot of sugar to it. And we're going to put yeast in that must. And we're going to put a stopper in the top of the bottle. And from that stopper, we're going to take a tube, and we're going to put that tube into water. And that means that the yeast can no longer what? Respire. They can't bring in oxygen anymore. No more functioning of the ETC, no more ETC terminal electron acceptor. And they're like, now we go from making a lot of ATP per every glucose molecule to just making a little. But they also simultaneously begin to make what we want, booze, right? So in that process of becoming anaerobic. Now, the enzyme that is involved with that, the conversion of pyruvate into alcohol, acetaldehyde is an intermediate in that whole process, is catalyzed by this enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. But interestingly, after the yeast do their work and then you do yours, you also have an isozyme of alcohol dehydrogenase in your liver that takes that alcohol and converts it backwards into acetaldehyde and then finally detoxifies, right, in your liver. So this is the enzyme that next time you're praying to the porcelain goddess, you should thank alcohol dehydrogenase and aldehyde dehydrogenase instead. So this is the one you can say, yes, get my alcohol dehydrogenase moving a little faster. Okay, so look at this enzyme, and I want you to look at its active site, and I want you to tell me, what does it have? Does it have an essential ion? Let's be sure. Because yes, what is the essential ion? Zinc, right, okay. Does it have a prosthetic group? No, right? Because I don't see anything like flavin, adenine, dinucleotide, or FAD. Does it have a co-substrate? Yes. What is that co-substrate? NAD. Right. Good. So now you see why Andre is already pondering stealing my women's one dailies before he goes out drinking, right? Up the level of activity of that alcohol dehydrogenase. Okay, good. I'll have my eye on you. All right, I have a question for you guys. Following is a picture of an enzyme isolated from Pseudomonas putida. This is an important bioremediation organism. Based on this image, which statements are true? So think this over. Talk to your neighbor. A, this enzyme requires a prosthetic group. B, this enzyme requires a co-substrate. C, there is an effector molecule that binds to this enzyme. D, this enzyme can function as an apoenzyme. So decide on your answer. I'm going to leave this up for a little while. You can talk. I don't care if you talk. Okay, I'm going to be removing the picture here really soon, so pick your answer. I've had too many times to breathe. I'm angsty. You got it? Totally solid? It's going away. All right, bring it back for just a second. Just 1 second. Yeah. Oh, shit. Hang on. Which statements? Ready. Go. Oh man, I'm impressed. You guys' texting fingers, they're getting faster. This bodes well for your social life. All right, it looks like we are all in agreement that B and C are the answer. Let's go ahead and flip back and look at why. So recognize that there is an allosteric site right here. What binds at that allosteric site? An effector. What kind of effects might that effector have? Inhibition, right? What kind of molecule might be an inhibitor? A product? Okay, good. So maybe that effector site is subject to allosteric feedback inhibition by some product molecule. Good. But we definitely know that there must be an effector that binds there. And then NADH, what category is that in? Co-substrate. So that helps us to fully answer that. It looks like you guys did a great job. I do want to clarify, this enzyme cannot function as an apoenzyme, right? Because an apoenzyme lacks what? Its cofactor. And remember that cofactor is essential to the function of the enzyme. Nice job. You guys are doing awesome. So I'm hoping that Brent is still pondering the question that I threw out last time, and that idea that an enzyme binds most tightly to what? Remember? Yeah, go ahead. Good, Jojo. Transition state, right? The transition state. So still pondering that. I want to talk about enzyme inhibition. So enzymes can be purposefully inhibited. In fact, we do it all the time. Just this morning, I took some Advil, right? And Advil is an enzyme inhibitor, right? It inhibits the enzyme called prostaglandin synthase. It's the COX enzyme, cyclooxygenase, or not important, but it does inhibit the enzyme that's on the pathway to pain and inflammation. So we're constantly wanting to inhibit enzymes. We do it a lot with drugs. So when we think about designing an inhibitor of an enzyme, we have to think about what that enzyme's active site looks like. So typically, what that enzyme binds to is a substrate. But an inhibitor is going to look like the substrate, right? So you can see in this particular cartoon image that that inhibitor is going to directly compete with the substrate for binding at the enzyme active site. This is a particular class of inhibitors called competitive inhibitors. So we're going to watch this in a cheesy cartoon where the substrate and the inhibitor are going to compete with one another for the binding at that active site. And we'll see what wins out. Oh, inhibitor wins out, right? Now, what is actually going to dictate what wins out? Concentration. Good. So if there's a higher concentration of inhibitor than there is substrate, it's more likely that inhibitor is going to win out. What else is going to dictate it? Attraction. Excellent. So we call it the Km versus the Ki. Now that's just sexy lingo to say how much does that enzyme desire its substrate versus its inhibitor. If it desires its inhibitor more, then that's going to give an advantage to that inhibitor to bind at the site in place of the substrate. So we can say that we like to design a lot of these, and in fact some antibiotics are enzyme inhibitors. For example, the sulfa drugs are ones that we talked about yesterday, and as promised, Rex, those inhibit the synthesis of folic acid. So folic acid is synthesized by bacteria. And if we stop the anabolic process, that is the building process of folic acid in bacteria, we can kill or inhibit their growth. And that's what the sulfa drugs do. So they're inhibiting an enzyme in that pathway. Now, why don't we get hit by the sulfa drugs? I mean, all of a sudden, why don't we find ourselves like, oh man, I can't make folic acid anymore. Bummer. We already can't. We cannot. We are one of those lame organisms that cannot synthesize our growth factors, and we have to take them in our diet. So when we look back at my Women's One Daily again, we will absolutely see that it has folate in it, right? Good. Okay, so now JoJo is still thinking about that question of the fact that an enzyme binds more tightly to its transition state than it does to its, you guys got to help me today, it's Friday. Substrate, right? Okay, all right, so what does that mean? If you're a mad organic chemist, what are you trying to synthesize at your benchtop every day? You guys are giggling. I don't know what you're trying to synthesize. But you want to inhibit an enzyme. What kind of a molecule are you going to want to make? A big one. Maybe. It depends upon what looks like, JoJo. Transition state. You want to make something that looks like.
The substrate.
Yes, but you're a good organic chemist, but you're not super good because an enzyme binds more tightly to its transition state. So you want to make a transition state analog. Transition state analogs bind the most tightly to the enzyme active site. So think of that. Isn't that a sexy job? I anticipate a molecule that has never been observed, but that we know exists, and then I try to make analogs for it, right? That sounds really good. So, that's what organic chemists are looking to try to do. So let's write it down. Transition state analogs are the best inhibitors of enzymes, right? They are the best inhibitors of enzymes. Now, making something that competes for binding at the active site of an enzyme is not the only way to inhibit an enzyme, and in fact many toxins actually do it another way. Heavy metal toxins such as silver, they will bind to the sulfhydryl groups of cysteine residues. Remember, cysteines are the amino acids with the R groups with the SH in them, that's sulfhydryl. So you will see the binding of silver onto those groups, and that kills the enzymes. So some toxins kill enzymes by binding at sites other than the active site. That is termed non-competitive because they're binding at a site that is not the active site. And both non-competitive and competitive inhibitors can be either irreversible or reversible. Irreversible inhibitors bind covalently, and when an irreversible inhibitor binds, it kills the enzyme. There's no coming back from that. It can't unbind that competitive inhibitor or that non-competitive inhibitor that has covalently linked to it. On the other hand, a reversible inhibitor can dissociate. Penicillin is an irreversible inhibitor of the enzymes involved in cell wall synthesis. And Christian will tell us those enzymes are called? He's like, damn. No, three short letters. We just talked about them not 2 hours ago. Well, okay. I like that you are remembering that. I'm real proud. But earlier today, about 2 hours ago, we talked about a three-letter PBP. Yeah. Penicillin binding protein. Remember that homework question that talks about PBP? And he's like, what the heck is PBP? Okay, well, penicillin binding protein is the enzyme that builds the tetrapeptide chains in cell walls. And penicillin is an irreversible inhibitor of that enzyme involved in cell wall synthesis. Okay? All right, we're too loopy today to be in class. It's gonna be like lecture Tourette's, just blubber every time I ask anything. Oh, yeah, we really are too loopy to be in lecture. You guys have had too much coffee, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so reversible inhibitors bind in a dissociable way, leaving the enzyme unaltered. So this is interesting, right? Because it relates back to the Advil and Tylenol versus aspirin kind of inhibitor. So I know this doesn't maybe directly to relate, but you know, what's about the first thing you do when you get the influenza virus? Throw up. Well, remember, you know, that's one of those misnomers. The stomach flu is not the influenza virus. What's the first thing that happens when you get the influenza virus, respiratory virus? Oh, okay, fever is number one. So you're going to down some Advil to bring the fever down, or Tylenol to bring the fever down, or maybe aspirin. And it's interesting to note that Advil and Tylenol are reversible inhibitors of the enzyme, the COX enzyme, whereas aspirin is an irreversible inhibitor. So aspirin binds and essentially kills that enzyme. It can't be used again, whereas Tylenol and Advil, they're binding in a dissociable way. They're reversible inhibitors of that same enzyme. So that's one of the things that makes those different. Okay? So take aspirin. You know, there are other questionable effects of aspirin, right? That can be, you know, for some people of issues such as stomach disruption, right? And it's interesting to note that actually those COX inhibitors also inhibit normal functions of maintenance of gastrointestinal tract, right? Right. Yeah, Joe. Yeah, and it's a COX inhibitor, I believe, too, but I don't know reversibility. Does anybody know that? I don't know. The naproxen pain relievers? I don't know if it's irreversible or reversible. Rex, do you know?
It's in the same classification of drugs as acetaminophen and Advil.
Okay, so it must be reversible. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Yeah, very good. So you guys, this actually ends our coverage of enzymes. Does anybody have any questions broadly on enzymes at all? We feeling pretty good on them? Okay, good. I hope you love them as much as I love them. And as we go into our coverage of the next round, yes, it's Friday, and you're thinking about this whole idea of making wine, right, or making beer, okay? And I want to go back in time to the years in which Edward Buckner and Louis Pasteur were working to prove something very contentious. That is, at the time, they were trying to prove that yeast cells were literally taking in sugar and releasing alcohol. And this was very contentious. In fact, there were two German chemists at the time, Lieberg and von Wöhler, that poked fun at Pasteur and Buchner, and they said, "You are ridiculous," and they actually published cartoons of yeast cells where the yeast cells were taking in sugar from one orifice and literally peeing out ethanol. Yeah, and they're like, "You silly, foolish men," right? And so Pasteur and Buchner had to actually go about this in some really scientific ways to show them that, yes, yeast cells are taking in sugar and peeing out ethanol. Take that. And they were able to do so. In fact, they were able to extract the enzymes from the yeast cells and show that it was a pathway, a metabolic pathway in the cell that was creating ethanol as a product of that catabolism of sugar. So we all are getting this, right? Earlier you guys told me that when we starve yeast of oxygen, they begin to produce ethanol. They no longer have their terminal electron acceptor, their oxygen, and so they only have what available to them? What kind of metabolism are they working when they are producing ethanol? What do we call that? Fermentation, right? Good, fermentation. So now here's the weird thing. We're thinking, go yeast, go, make more booze, right? But the yeast are gradually accumulating a byproduct of metabolism, and that byproduct of metabolism, ethanol, will eventually kill them, right? Bummer. So the question is, wait a minute, you know, we thought the whole point was making alcohol, but it turns out the whole point is not making alcohol. What is the point? Why do they want to make something that eventually kills them? That ethanol will eventually kill them. Why do they want to do that? Short-term what? Energy. That is the key word right there. Energy. Is that what you're going to say, Brett?
Yeah, it's the only way they can produce
It's the only way they can produce energy. It is the only way, right? So in fact, they are only able to produce energy by converting the byproduct of glycolysis into ethanol, and that's the only way they can keep their cell making any ATP at all. So it is a byproduct of the continued production of ATP. So that is the answer to this question. And in fact, at the heart of it, it's perfect that Jojo just shouted out energy, because at the heart of metabolism is energy. And I think that is what our next slide does such a nice job of showing. At the heart of that slide, energy, at the heart of metabolism is the production of that energy. And we can split metabolism, which is the symphonic network of biological reactions for energy generation, conservation. And I was thinking to myself, Adam is going to love this coverage of metabolism, right? Because he's all about the biochemistry of the cell. And this is what this is all about. So what happens in metabolism is twofold. Number one, there's breakdown, right? So we get the breakdown of a high energy molecule, maybe blubber. We get the breakdown of that high energy molecule. And what do we call those kind of metabolic pathways? Breakdown. Breakdown pathways are called catabolic, right. When you think catabolic, think breakdown. When you think catabolic, think ripping and stripping of high energy electrons off of a food molecule. Ripping and stripping of high energy electrons, what's another term for that? Taking off electrons. Oxidation. When you think catabolism, think oxidation, right? Oxidation, taking off electrons, processes that degrade, they break down, they oxidize to liberate smaller molecules and energy. The energy can be used in three ways. Motion. Remember how PMF could be used to make the flagella go? Transport. Oh, remember how PMF could be like the EAC, right? Right in the PF, okay? And finally, anabolism. So the opposite of catabolism is anabolism. So if catabolism is breakdown, degradation, oxidation, what is anabolism? Buildup, reduction, excellent. So biosynthetic, reductive, anabolic pathways. Doesn't that sound good? Those terms go together. Biosynthetic, reductive, anabolism. I mean, if you're on a date tonight and you just don't know what else to say, just say biosynthetic, reductive, anabolism. And then you know you'll get a second date, right? Processes that utilize energy to build new stuff. I like to think about the wrecking ball coming down on a building. And when it comes down on that building, it liberates bricks. And those bricks can be used to build new buildings, right? This is what catabolism and anabolism are all about. And the building blocks, these have a technical name. They are called precursor metabolites. So the building blocks, or the little bricks that come off of catabolism, are technically called precursor metabolites. From here on out, I will commonly spout out the term precursor metab, and I will expect you to make the leap to the fact that that is the building block for anabolism. They are the smaller molecules that came out of catabolism to be used to make big molecules in anabolism. Precursor metabolites are at the center of these processes joining catabolism and anabolism. Okay, are we cool with the difference between catabolism and anabolism? Wonderful. At the heart here is still energy, and JoJo still wants to know more about energy, and she is totes going to tell us about the first law of thermodynamics. What does it say? Energy cannot be destroyed. She's like, Rachel, I wish someone would destroy your energy. Right? But energy just simply, first law of thermodynamics, cannot be destroyed. Now, I could transition it into another form of energy. So I could jump up onto the stage, and I could gain potential energy, right? And then I could jump off the stage, but I wouldn't be destroying my energy. I would just be converting it into kinetic energy, right? So energy can neither be created or destroyed. And that's what the first law of thermodynamics tells us. And this is very pertinent to a cellular system as well. If we think about Gen Chem, remember how in Gen Chem your professors always saying, this is the system and this is the surroundings. I was a Gen Chem professor, I used to do that. And in biology, the system is the cell. And the cell has some total internal energy. And that total internal energy can constantly be changing. And of course it is, because there is constantly catabolism and anabolism going on in the cell. So there's constant change. And if there is some event that releases energy, then we can see energy lost by the cell. But, as Jojo tells us, energy is not destroyed. If that energy is lost from the cell, it is gained by the surroundings, right? So energy is not created or destroyed, but it is transferred. Energy lost from the cell is gained by the surroundings. Now, we also can recall, maybe, if we really strain our brains, that delta E, or change in energy, is a function of two things. And hopefully my chemical engineers are remembering this pretty well. Delta E is a function of, heat transfer, which is called enthalpy. So it's a function of enthalpy. And it's also a function of the P delta V term, the pressure time change in volume term. But guess what? We biologists like to ignore the P delta V term because in the cell system, pressure is not generally changing that much. So we estimate that the delta H is roughly equal to the delta E. And that is the change in total internal energy is equal to the enthalpy change. Now, we can think about enthalpy, and I have to admit that took me years to get to the point that I really understand that was about a change in heat, right? Heat lost or heat gain. And we can think about what would be most favorable. That is, what is generally most favorable, an exothermic, heat lost, or heat gain, endothermic? Yeah, be more certain for me. And endothermic, gaining heat? I'm picturing taking a hot bath, gaining some heat. Exothermic, losing. Yeah, exothermic is generally more favorable. Okay, so that in mind, we can talk about the second law of thermodynamics. Okay, the second law of thermodynamics, what does it say? Okay, so Rachel is like being very technical up here. She's like, in a system, everything goes towards like entropy, right? Okay, that's what she said. And I simply say, nature seeks chaos, right? That is the second law of thermodynamics. Nature seeks chaos. All natural processes proceed such that the disorder of the universe is constantly increasing, aka nature seeks chaos. And that term, entropy, is what describes that chaos. And we give the letter S to describe entropy, and we can talk about overall change in entropy or the disorder of the system. Now, I brought in a demo with me today. I couldn't remember who likes gaming. Anybody a gamer out there? This is old-fashioned gaming, Cassie. Okay, so I have a set of cards here, and I want you to tell everybody what's true of these cards. Yeah, what's true of them? What do they look like? You know, if you're going to explain to somebody else that can't see your cards, what do they?
They're all in order.
They're all in order.
You go red, black, red, black.
Oh, yeah, that was a nice touch. Anything else?
It's missing.
It's missing The ace of spades. Some demonic person stole my ace. Okay, but that being said, you know what? I also put queens high. I just thought that should be a thing today. I thought, why are kings higher than queens? So I made queens high. But I'll tell you what happens if I ask her to shuffle those, shuffle the heck out of those. Shuffle the heck out of them. What are the chances that that deck is going to be arranged in the same way that I gave it to her? What do you think? No, right? This is not going to happen. And in fact, the chances of this happening is 1 in every 8 times 10 to the 67th. That is more seconds than the universe is old. So nature seeks chaos, right? There are so many more ways that that deck of cards could be unordered than it could be ordered. Right? So many ways. Your dorm room knows it well too, right? When you go home today, there are so many places to put your books not away, right? No, so it's only one place to put them away. So nature seeks chaos. So now if we put these things together, we can say that overall the free energy, which is called Gibbs free energy, we've met it once before, is a function of the enthalpy and the entropy of a system. The enthalpy change, delta H, the entropy change, delta S. Delta H minus T delta S gives us the overall free energy change, Gibbs free energy, okay? Taking into account both the first and the second laws of thermodynamics. Now, if we know that loss of heat is favorable and chaos is most certainly favorable, what can you tell me about values of delta G that are the most favorable? Negative, right? Because if delta H is negative and entropy is positive, we get a negative number minus a number, right? Then that's going to give us a really negative number. So the most free energy producing reactions have a negative delta H and a positive delta S for an overall free energy change that is negative. Now, we also recognize that Adam would tell us that the delta G is also expressed by another equation. That is the free energy of the products minus the free energy of the reactants. And this is something that we picked out from the other day when we were looking at the reaction progress diagram. And we mentioned that if you graphed free energy as a function of reaction progress, we would see potentially something where reactants were higher in energy than products. So if we take the free energy of the products minus the free energy of the reactants, in this reaction, what kind of value are we going to get for delta G? Negative. Is that an exergonic reaction or overall energy yielding? Yeah, it is, right? Negative delta G values. So there are two equations that can allow us to calculate overall delta G. So let's just write down then that if delta G is less than 0, the reaction is spontaneous. It is exergonic. It is energy releasing. And if delta G is greater than 0, it is overall endergonic, not spontaneous. Now, just for good measure, is there ever such a thing as a reaction that that is overall exergonic, but in that chaos doesn't increase? Could that ever happen? I know Christine's pondering this. Could that ever happen by that equation? Yeah. If what term was large enough? Large enough negative. Enthalpy, right. So if enthalpy was a big enough negative number, we could certainly get an entropy change that wasn't positive. So, but we know that overarchingly, the most certain way to get a delta G that is negative is to have both entropy going up and heat released, right? That's going to be the most spontaneous reaction we could see. So, hey, let's practice just a minute, because you're probably thinking, ooh, Rachel, take me back to the biological system, because I'm getting scared of all this chemistry. So let's go back to the biological system, and I want you to look at a reaction that I think all of you are going to recognize. C6H12O6, what is that? Sugar! Glucose, yay, glucose. Plus 6 oxygens goes to 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O. What is that reaction? Yay! Those of you who are biologists are like, that is cellular respiration, right? That is the process of oxidizing glucose using oxygen as a terminal electron acceptor and breathing out, right? What do you breathe out? CO2 and water. CO2 and water. That is totally cellular respiration. Now, those of you who are chemists are saying to yourself, that is so totally combustion. Yes, it is. That is taking the jelly donut, throwing it on the bonfire, and woo, carbonized, right? That is what is happening, right? So, is that process spontaneous? What do we think? No? It's not spontaneous? Jelly donut burning up. How about that delta G term, negative 686 kilocal per mole? What does that tell us? Spontaneous, right? What else? Exergonic, okay? So we could answer this as being what? E, A, and C, that looks solid, okay? This is spontaneous, this is exergonic, this is releasing energy. But Kenda is back there and she's leaving. You know why she's leaving? Because she's like, that reaction is so totally the opposite of my faith, which is, if we flip that reaction around, John, Kenda, what do we get? Photosynthesis, right? The production of sugar, bye, have a lovely day. The production of sugar from CO2 and H2O, right? That is photosynthesis. Now tell me about the delta G of photosynthesis. Positive, meaning it will be non-spontaneous and endergonic. Ooh, also meaning that it will also be, Jory, if it's anabolic, if the opposite process is anabolic, it is also reductive. Good, good. So in fact, the opposite process would consume electrons rather than releasing high energy electrons, right? It would be reductive, a reductive biosynthesis. That's what photosynthesis is. So on that note, have a lovely Friday.